Jace Renshaw wiped the sweat from his forehead and squinted at the bright twin suns of Galen 4. The air smelled of rust, oil, and burning metal, just like it always did in the scrapyards. He had spent the entire morning digging through piles of broken machinery, hoping to find something valuable. But so far, all he had was a sack full of rusty prosthetics and damaged cybernetic implants. Useless junk, he muttered, tossing a broken robotic arm aside. Jace was a scavenger, one of the many who survived by picking through the remains of old battles. Galen 4 had once been an important planet, filled with factories and cities, but war had turned it into a wasteland. Now all that remained were crumbling buildings, shattered war machines, and piles of forgotten technology. He adjusted his worn-out gloves and continued searching. Every day was the same. Wake up, scavenge, sell whatever he could find, and hope to afford enough food for the night. It wasn't much of a life, but it was the only one he knew. As he dug deeper into the wreckage, his fingers brushed against something cold and smooth. Frowning, he cleared away the dirt and metal scraps. Beneath the debris, a mechanical leg, surprisingly well preserved, glinted in the sunlight. Unlike the other prosthetics he had found, this one wasn't rusted or broken. "This might be worth something," Jace murmured, carefully pulling it out. He turned it over in his hands, examining the strange markings etched into the metal. This wasn't human technology. He had seen enough alien junk to know that. The design was sleek, the metal dark and polished, with glowing blue lines running across its surface. His heart pounded with excitement. If this was an alien prosthetic, it could fetch a good price, maybe even enough to buy passage off this miserable planet. But before he could celebrate, a low groan echoed through the scrapyard. Jace froze. It wasn't the wind, and it wasn't the sound of shifting metal. It was a voice, weak and filled with pain. Slowly, he turned his head. A figure lay partially buried beneath the wreckage, motionless except for the slow rise and fall of its chest. Jace's breath caught in his throat. It wasn't human. The being was tall and broad-shouldered, its skin a deep shade of gray, almost metallic in appearance. Its armor was cracked and covered in dust, and one of its arms was missing. But it was the face that sent a chill through Jace's spine. Fierce, with sharp features and eyes that glowed faintly even in the daylight. An alien, a real, living alien. Jace had seen dead aliens before, their bodies left behind after battles. But this one was alive and injured. The alien groaned again, shifting slightly, as if trying to move, but lacking the strength. Its remaining hand weakly reached toward the missing limb, where a stump of torn metal and flesh sparked faintly. Jace swallowed hard. It needed help. For a long moment, he stood frozen, unsure of what to do. Helping an injured alien was dangerous. He didn't know where it had come from, or who might be looking for it. If it had enemies, they wouldn't be far behind. But then he looked at the alien's face again. There was no threat in its eyes, only exhaustion and pain. It was desperate. Jace sighed. "You're gonna be trouble, aren't you?" The alien didn't answer, of course. Shaking his head, Jace crouched down and pulled out a small canteen of water from his bag. He hesitated for only a second before pressing it against the alien's lips. The alien's eyes fluttered open, slightly surprised. Then, weakly, it drank. Jace let out a breath he didn't realize he was holding. "Well, I guess that means you're not dead." The alien tried to speak, but its voice was hoarse, the words in a language Jace didn't understand. It didn't matter. Jace had spent enough time around alien wreckage to recognize the tone. It was gratitude. He sighed again, rubbing the back of his neck. "Guess I better find a way to fix you up." The alien exhaled and closed its eyes, as if trusting Jace to keep his word. Jace sat back on his heels, staring at the damaged cybernetic limb. He glanced at the alien prosthetic he had found earlier, then back at the injured warrior. An idea began to form in his mind. Maybe, just maybe, the universe had finally decided to throw something interesting his way. And if he played his cards right, this might be his ticket to something bigger than just another day in the scrapyard. Jace worked quickly, his hands moving with a focus that was almost second nature. The alien lay on the cold metal ground, breathing heavily but still conscious. Jace had done enough patching up of machines to know how to repair a damaged prosthetic, but fixing something this advanced was another story. He examined the alien's cybernetic limbs carefully. The broken arm was beyond repair, and the leg would need some work to make it functional again. Jace wasn't sure what kind of technology this alien used, but it was unlike anything he had ever seen. The metal felt strong, more advanced than most of the tech he had come across. After a few minutes of thought, Jace grabbed his toolkit from his bag. It wasn't much, just some basic tools for working with metal and wires, but it would have to do. As he worked on the arm, he glanced up at the alien's face. "Hold still, will ya?" he muttered. "I'm not exactly a doctor, but I can fix your leg." The alien's eyes opened for a moment and stared at him, its glowing pupils flickering slightly in the dim light. It didn't respond, but Jace could feel its gaze, steady and intense, as if trying to assess whether or not he could be trusted. "I'm not gonna hurt you," Jace said, more to himself than the alien. "But you're gonna owe me big time for this." The alien's body was built for strength, its muscles and frame powerful and imposing. It seemed almost unnatural for something so strong to be in this state, broken and vulnerable. Jace had no idea how it had ended up in the scrapyard, but he knew one thing. This wasn't just another random survivor. The warrior had a purpose. Jace pulled out a small wrench and began working on the alien's prosthetic leg, tightening bolts and carefully replacing parts that seemed worn out. The alien didn't flinch or protest, though it was clearly uncomfortable. Its eyes remained focused on Jace, watching his every move. It didn't take long for Jace to realize that this wasn't a typical scavenger's find. This was something different. He had worked with broken tech before, but nothing like this. The alien's machinery was too sophisticated, too precise. Whoever, or whatever, had created it, they had been far beyond the level of technology that Jace was used to. As he worked, he couldn't help but wonder what kind of species this alien was. Its features were sharp and elegant, with skin that seemed to shimmer in the light. Its armor, though battered and scratched, still held an air of elegance and purpose. The alien was a warrior, that much was clear, but what had brought it to this wasteland? Jace didn't have the answers, but he couldn't just leave it here to die. Even though the alien wasn't human, he felt a strange connection to it. Maybe it was the fact that they were both survivors, stuck on a planet that had long since been forgotten by the rest of the galaxy. Maybe it was the fact that the alien, despite being an enemy of humanity for so many years, was in need of help. Either way, Jace couldn't turn his back. "There," he muttered, stepping back and wiping his hands on his worn-out shirt. "That should hold for now." The alien tried to move its arm, but winced in pain. It was clear the warrior had been through a lot. Jace gave it a sympathetic glance but didn't say anything. There was no need for words at this point. The two of them sat in silence for a while, the only sounds being the soft rustling of the wind and the distant hum of the scrapyard. Jace leaned back against a pile of twisted metal and looked up at the alien. "So, what's your name?" he asked casually, though he wasn't expecting an answer. To his surprise, the alien's lips parted, and it spoke in a language Jace couldn't understand. The words were deep, almost musical, and full of emotion. Jace could tell it was trying to communicate, but the language was foreign to him. "Yeah, that doesn't help me much," Jace chuckled nervously. "I'm Jace, by the way." The alien's glowing eyes seemed to soften for a moment. It was probably a coincidence, but Jace liked to think the warrior understood him, even if it couldn't respond in a way he could comprehend. As the hours passed, Jace kept working on the alien's prosthetics, making them more secure, though he couldn't fix the damage completely. The warrior needed real medical attention, something that Jace couldn't provide on his own. Still, he did what he could. Finally, the alien's voice broke through the silence again, speaking a few more words. This time, it sounded like it was trying to explain something. Jace frowned, his brow furrowing as he realized the alien was trying to warn him. It gestured toward the sky, its fingers trembling slightly, as though trying to convey an urgent message. Jace's eyes narrowed, and he followed the alien's gaze. In the distance, beyond the wreckage, he saw something moving, shadows in the fading light. Jace's heart skipped a beat. "Trouble?" he asked, glancing back at the alien. The warrior gave a slow, grim nod. Jace had been scavenging long enough to know when trouble was coming. And judging by the look in the alien's eyes, trouble was indeed heading their way. He didn't know who or what was after the alien, but it was clear that their presence here was no coincidence. "Well, this just got interesting," Jace muttered, grabbing his bag. "Time to move." With one last look at the alien, Jace stood up and helped it to its feet. The warrior stumbled but regained its balance, a look of determination crossing its face. Together, they had no choice but to face whatever was coming. Jace moved quickly, his boots crunching over the metal debris, as he helped the alien warrior stumble toward the only safe place he knew, an old hidden warehouse buried deep within the scrapyard. The warrior's prosthetics were functional now, but it still moved slowly, its body clearly drained from whatever fight it had just escaped. The shadows were growing longer, and Jace's gut tightened. Something was wrong. The distant sounds of engines and clanking metal grew louder, signaling that whoever, or whatever, was after the alien was getting closer. "You all right?" Jace asked, glancing at the warrior. The alien didn't respond with words, but Jace could tell it was still alert, its glowing eyes scanning the surroundings, a quiet intensity in its posture. It was wounded, exhausted, but its instincts were sharp. There was a fierceness about it, the kind of fierceness that could only belong to someone who had survived countless battles. "Guess you're not gonna tell me who's chasing you, huh?" Jace asked with a small chuckle, trying to lighten the mood. But deep down, he knew this wasn't a time for jokes. Whatever was coming for the warrior, it wasn't going to stop until it had what it wanted. They reached the warehouse, and Jace pushed open the rusted metal door. The inside was dark, but the air smelled fresher than outside, with only a hint of oil and dust. Jace quickly moved to a stack of crates near the back and hid behind them, pulling the warrior down beside him. They both crouched, waiting. Jace's heart pounded in his chest, and he tried to quiet his breathing. He wasn't a soldier. He was a scavenger, someone who made his living off forgotten machines. But now, for the first time, he was facing something far bigger than himself. He wasn't sure if he was ready for this. "Stay low," he whispered, though he wasn't sure if the warrior understood him. The alien's eyes flickered toward him, nodding slightly in response. It was clear it had been through much worse. Whatever it was, Jace knew one thing for sure. It wasn't just a lost traveler. This alien had a purpose, and now, it had involved Jace in that purpose, whether he liked it or not. Outside the warehouse, the sound of engines grew louder. Jace's hands clenched into fists. He glanced at the alien, who was staring through a crack in the wall, watching the movement outside. "Whoever's coming for you," Jace said quietly, "they won't find you here. But they'll keep looking." The alien shifted its weight, still alert, as if listening to Jace's words. It then placed a hand on its chest, where a faint glow pulsed beneath the armor. It was a gesture of some sort, almost as if the warrior was trying to communicate its appreciation. Jace sighed, unsure of what to make of the situation. He wasn't a hero. He had never asked for this, but something about the alien's plight, its silent plea for help, struck a chord deep within him. He wasn't about to just leave it to die. The sounds of footsteps grew louder. Jace's pulse quickened as he grabbed a nearby metal pipe. He wasn't a fighter, but he had learned to use whatever tools were at hand. As the footsteps drew closer, The warehouse door creaked open slowly. Jace tensed, his grip tightening around the pipe. From the shadows, a group of armored figures emerged, their helmets gleaming in the dim light. Their footsteps were heavy and deliberate, each movement calculated. Jace's eyes narrowed. These weren't just scavengers like him. They were soldiers, mercenaries. Their weapons were sleek, built for precision. Jace held his breath, praying they wouldn't notice him or the alien. The lead soldier paused in the doorway, scanning the room. "I know you're here," the soldier's voice echoed, low and menacing. "Come out, and we can make this easy." The alien tensed beside Jace, its posture becoming more rigid. Jace had no idea what was going on or who these people were, but he could tell that whatever it was, they weren't friends. Jace looked at the alien, who seemed to understand the situation. The warrior's eyes met his, a silent agreement passing between them. It was as if the alien knew that Jace, despite his hesitation, was willing to help. "I'm not gonna let them take you," Jace whispered to the alien, though he wasn't sure if a warrior heard him. The truth was, he didn't have a plan. He didn't have a strategy. All he knew was that he couldn't just hide and do nothing. The soldiers took another step forward, their boots scraping against the concrete floor. One of them, a tall, imposing figure, glanced toward the crates where Jace and the alien were hiding. "Move," Jace muttered, his voice steady despite the fear rising in his chest. Without warning, he leaped from his hiding spot and swung the metal pipe with all his strength, knocking one of the soldiers off balance. The soldier staggered back, but Jace didn't wait to see the impact. He darted to the side, grabbing the alien's arm and pulling it toward the back of the warehouse. "We're not staying here," Jace shouted. "We're getting out." The alien stumbled behind him, but its movements were growing more fluid, more controlled. It was still weak, but there was power in its steps, strength in its resolve. Jace glanced back, just in time to see the soldiers rushing after them. The chase was on. Jace's heart pounded in his chest as he pulled the alien warrior through the dark, narrow halls of the warehouse. His hands were slick with sweat, but he didn't dare slow down. The soldiers were right behind them, and he could hear their heavy footsteps growing louder with each passing second. "Come on," Jace hissed under his breath, urging the alien to move faster. The warrior's steps were slower than before, but its eyes were sharp, constantly scanning for any possible escape route. It was still injured, still weak, but there was a fire in its gaze, a fire that told Jace it would not go down without a fight. They reached a metal door at the far end of the warehouse. Jace didn't stop to think. He grabbed the handle and yanked it open. The door creaked loudly, and he winced at the sound. It wasn't ideal. They needed to be quiet, but time wasn't on their side. "Where are we going?" Jace asked, looking over at the alien as he pulled it through the door and into the alley behind the warehouse. "You gotta have some plan, right?" The alien didn't answer. It didn't need to. Its gaze was focused on the alleyway ahead, its body tensing as it prepared to move. Jace could feel the warrior's determination, but he couldn't help feeling nervous. They were out of options, and they didn't have much time before the soldiers found them. Jace glanced behind them. The soldiers were in the warehouse now, moving quickly through the aisles, calling out to each other in harsh, clipped commands. Jace could hear the unmistakable sound of a communicator crackling to life. "They're spreading out," Jace muttered to himself. He looked at the warrior, who gave a single short nod. They needed to move faster. They dashed down the alley, keeping to the shadows, hoping to stay out of sight. The streetlights were dim, barely illuminating the path ahead. It was the perfect cover for now, but Jace knew it wouldn't last long. The soldiers were good at their job, and they wouldn't be fooled for long. Jace's breath came in ragged gasps, his legs burning from the sprint. He glanced over at the alien, who was keeping pace with him, despite the heavy injury. The warrior's eyes flickered toward him, and for the first time since they had met, Jace saw something, something that wasn't just pain or exhaustion. It was gratitude. "You're welcome," Jace said quietly, more to himself than the alien. Up ahead, a set of broken-down vehicles sat abandoned in the alley. A large, rusted truck was parked beside them, its door slightly ajar. Jace made a snap decision. "There," he said, pointing toward the truck. "We can hide there for a bit." The alien followed his lead without question, its movements precise and deliberate. They ducked behind the truck, and Jace peeked out from the edge of the vehicle, keeping an eye on the alley behind them. He could hear the soldiers getting closer. "They're coming," Jace whispered, his voice tight. "I don't know how much time we have, but we've got to move." The alien nodded again, its body tense, prepared to fight if necessary. But Jace wasn't sure they had that kind of time. He knew they couldn't outrun the soldiers forever. Jace's mind raced, trying to think of an escape plan. The alleyway wasn't an option anymore. The soldiers had already seen it. But then, his eyes landed on something. A narrow opening between two buildings, just a few meters away. It was a gap too small for most vehicles, but just wide enough for them to squeeze through. "Over there," Jace said, grabbing the warrior's arm and pulling it in the direction of the gap. "We can use that." The alien didn't hesitate. It followed Jace, its steps quiet and quick as they dashed toward the gap. The space between the buildings was tight, but it would be their best chance at losing the soldiers. As they reached the opening, Jace felt a rush of relief. They were so close. But then, a voice shouted from behind them. "There they are. Get them." The soldiers were closing in fast. "No time," Jace shouted. "We move now." They squeezed through the gap just as the soldiers rounded the corner. Jace heard the sharp sounds of footsteps and shouted orders from behind, but they were already moving out of sight. The gap led into a small courtyard, filled with piles of debris and old crates. It wasn't exactly safe, but it was enough for now. Jace stopped for a moment to catch his breath, his chest heaving. The alien didn't pause. It was still scanning the area, alert to every sound, every movement. "Do you have any idea where we're going?" Jace asked, his voice a little more frantic now. "Any escape route? Anything?" The warrior's glowing eyes flickered as it looked at Jace. Then, without warning, it began to move again, this time more cautiously. It didn't answer, but Jace didn't need words to understand. The alien was leading him. It had a plan, and he had no choice but to trust it. Jace followed, staying close behind, and together they crept through the maze of abandoned buildings. Every step felt like it could be their last. He had never been part of anything like this. This wasn't scavenging for junk anymore. This was real danger, and they were both in the middle of it. But as they continued to move deeper into the heart of the old city, Jace couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't just running from danger. They were running toward something. Something big. Jace's legs were starting to ache, but he didn't stop. The alien warrior led the way, moving with a purpose that Jace couldn't quite understand. The streets were quiet now, the usual sounds of the scrapyard replaced by an eerie stillness. They moved through the shadows, avoiding the few remaining patrols the soldiers had sent out. Jace's heart was still pounding from the chase, and the weight of what had just happened was sinking in. He hadn't signed up for any of this. He was just a scavenger, a man trying to survive in a broken world. But now, here he was, running through the night with an alien warrior by his side, dodging soldiers who were clearly after something far bigger than just a lost wanderer. Jace followed closely, the gap between them closing as they reached an old, forgotten subway entrance. The rusted metal doors were partially open, the surrounding walls crumbling and covered in moss. It was a place Jace had only seen in passing, something that seemed abandoned long ago. But now, it seemed like the perfect hiding spot. The alien warrior glanced around before stepping into the entrance. Without a word, Jace followed, the metal door creaking as it swung shut behind them. The inside was dark, and the air was damp, but the coolness felt good against Jace's heated skin. The alien didn't wait for Jace to speak. It moved swiftly, its steps echoing in the silence as it led them deeper into the tunnels. Jace struggled to keep up, but the warrior didn't seem to notice. After what felt like an hour of walking in the darkness, Jace's thoughts began to race. What's going on? He muttered to himself. What do they want with you? And who are they really? The alien's eyes flickered, and for a moment it paused, its head turning slightly as if it had heard Jace's words. But it didn't stop to answer, as if it were saving its strength for something more important. They reached a large underground chamber. The ceiling was high, supported by rusted metal beams. The floor was covered in grime and dust, and debris was scattered everywhere. It looked like the old subway system had been abandoned long before the scrapyard had turned into what it was now. Jace wiped his brow, breathing heavily. I guess this is as good a place as any, right? The alien didn't answer, but it walked over to a cracked wall and pressed a hidden panel that Jace hadn't noticed. A low hum filled the air, and part of the wall slid open to reveal a small, dimly lit room. The warrior motioned for Jace to enter, and he hesitated only for a moment before stepping inside. The room was simple, but it was clear the alien had been here before. There were remnants of old equipment, a few scattered tools, and a strange, glowing device resting on a table. Jace's curiosity got the better of him. What is all this? He asked, eyeing the device. The alien didn't respond, but instead moved over to a set of old controls near the back wall. It tapped a series of buttons, and the room hummed to life. Screens flickered on, displaying various maps and schematics of places Jace didn't recognize. Some of the images seemed to show parts of the galaxy. Others looked like they were from the very city they had just left. But what caught Jace's eye was a strange symbol, glowing faintly on one of the screens. What is that? He asked, stepping closer. The alien paused, its gaze shifting to the screen. It placed a hand over the symbol for a moment, as if to activate something. The image on the screen shifted, revealing a series of ships, one of which was far larger than the others. The ship looked like a fortress, covered in metal plates, its design sleek and alien. That's a warship? Jace asked, his voice low. The alien nodded slowly. But why would they be chasing you? Jace continued, his confusion growing. Who are they? And what's this ship? The warrior seemed to hesitate, as if choosing its words carefully. Finally, it turned toward Jace, its glowing eyes flickering with a hint of something that could almost be described as regret. In a voice that was almost a whisper, the alien spoke. We are the Orin. We were once protectors, guardians of the galaxy. But something went wrong. My people, we were betrayed. Jace's eyes widened. He had heard rumors of lost civilizations, of ancient empires that had vanished long ago. But he never thought he'd hear it from the mouth of someone who had lived through it. You're telling me you're one of them. A protector? Jace's voice trembled slightly. The idea seemed almost impossible. The alien looked so different from what Jace had imagined. Yet the sadness in its eyes, the wariness in its movements, it all made sense now. The warrior nodded again, the weight of its words heavy in the air. We were betrayed by those we trusted. Our enemies now seek to finish what they started. They want the warship, the last of our kind, to use its power for their own purposes. I escaped, but they've been hunting me ever since. Jace blinked, processing the information. And that's what they want from you. They think you have the warship. The alien's eyes dimmed, its expression unreadable. They believe I know its location, but they are mistaken. I fled before I could learn where it was hidden. Jace took a step back, his mind spinning. You're telling me you've been on the run all this time, and you don't even know where the ship is? The alien seemed to struggle with the question, its gaze shifting downward. I have failed my people. Jace didn't know what to say. For the first time, he understood just how much this warrior had lost. It wasn't just its people, it was everything. The weight of betrayal, the endless chase, the constant battle to survive. "You didn't fail," Jace said, surprising himself with the words. "You're still alive. And that means there's still hope." The alien's eyes met his, a flicker of something resembling hope sparking in them. "Thank you," the alien said softly. Jace wasn't sure what to think. He had just stumbled into a galaxy-spanning war, a fight he had no place in. But something in him couldn't turn away now. The alien's story, its pain, it was too real to ignore. They were in this together now. The small underground room grew quieter as Jace stood there, processing the alien warrior's story. The air felt heavy, charged with the weight of what they had just uncovered. The warrior, still standing near the controls, seemed lost in thought. Its glowing eyes, which had once been full of pain and fear, now seemed distant, as if trying to reconcile the past with the present. Jace couldn't imagine what it must have felt like, having everything taken from you, your people betrayed, and now hunted by enemies you could never fully escape. His life had been about survival, scavenging through the wreckage of the old world, but this was something else entirely. This was a battle for something much larger than either of them could fully understand. "So, what now?" Jace asked, breaking the silence. His voice was soft, unsure, but it carried a sense of urgency. "You said they're after the warship, but you don't know where it is. And you don't have anyone to help you." He paused, glancing at the strange devices on the table. "What if they find you again? What if they come after you harder?" The alien didn't answer right away. It took a step back, as if considering Jace's question carefully. Its gaze turned to the glowing symbol on the screen, and for a brief moment, it seemed lost in thought. "I do not know," the warrior finally said. Its voice was low, almost melancholic. "I have been alone for too long. My people are gone. I cannot return to them. But I must continue. I must stop them." Jace didn't know what to say to that. He wasn't sure what kind of help he could offer someone like the warrior. He was just a scavenger. But something inside him told him that walking away wasn't an option. "So, if you don't know where the warship is, then what's the plan?" Jace asked, trying to sound more confident than he felt. "We can't keep running forever, right? We have to figure something out." The warrior turned back to the control panel, tapping a few buttons. The screens flickered again, showing a new map of the city. This one was different from the others. Detailed, precise, and marked with several locations. Jace stepped closer, his curiosity piqued. "There is a place," the alien said, pointing to a specific spot on the map. "It is a hidden bunker, one of the last remaining outposts of my people. It may hold the answers I need to find the warship. If I can reach it, I may discover more about its location." Jace stared at the map, tracing the location the alien pointed to. It was on the outskirts of the city, deep within an area of old buildings and abandoned warehouses. The place looked far from safe, but Jace could see the resolve in the warrior's posture. It wasn't giving up, and that made him realize something. This wasn't just about finding the warship. This was about redemption. "All right," Jace said, nodding. "If you think that's the best lead, then we go there. But I'm not just going to follow you blindly. We need a plan. We need to know how to get in and out without getting caught." The alien turned to face him, its glowing eyes narrowing slightly. It seemed to be weighing his words. For a long moment, the two of them stood in silence, locked in a silent understanding. Finally, the alien gave a slow nod. "We will need to move quickly," it said, its voice steady but firm. "The soldiers will not give up so easily. If we are to reach the bunker, we must be prepared for anything." Jace swallowed, a knot forming in his stomach. He had no idea how they were going to get past the soldiers, let alone the countless dangers that lurked in the city. But he couldn't back down now. "We'll need weapons," Jace said, tapping his fingers nervously against the metal surface of a nearby crate. "We can't just rely on sneaking around. We're going to need a way to defend ourselves." The alien looked at him, its eyes calculating. After a moment, it moved toward a nearby crate, pulling out an old battered weapon from within. It was a sleek alien design, something Jace had never seen before. The weapon hummed softly as the warrior held it in its hand, inspecting it carefully. "This will do for now," the alien said, handing it to Jace. Jace took the weapon, feeling its weight in his hands. It felt strange, but not entirely unfamiliar. It was heavier than any gun he'd ever held, but there was a certain power to it, a confidence that came with holding something made for battle. "We'll make do," Jace said, examining the weapon more closely. "But we'll need more than just one gun, right? There's no way this is enough." The alien nodded. "There are hidden caches scattered throughout the city. If we can locate them, we will find what we need." Jace's mind started to work quickly. "All right, so we'll need to hit the caches along the way to the bunker. But we can't just go charging in without a plan. The soldiers are looking for us, and they'll be watching the streets. We'll have to stay off the main roads." The alien's gaze met his, and for the first time, Jace saw a flicker of something like respect in its eyes. The warrior knew this was a dangerous mission, but it seemed to appreciate Jace's willingness to plan. "Then we move at night," the warrior said. "We will travel under cover of darkness. The soldiers will not be able to track us as easily." Jace nodded. It was risky, but it was the best option they had. They spent the next few hours preparing, gathering what little they could from the hidden room. The alien warrior showed Jace how to use the weapon and explained how to avoid the soldiers' tracking devices. It was a crash course in survival, but Jace was quick to learn. As they made their way back to the surface, Jace felt a sense of determination settling in his chest. This was no longer just about survival. It was about helping this warrior, and maybe even saving what was left of the galaxy. "We're doing this," Jace muttered to himself, his voice steady. The warrior, walking beside him, didn't answer. But Jace didn't need words to know that they were both in this together. Jace adjusted the alien weapon in his grip, feeling the cool metal press against his palm. The underground chamber was now silent except for the faint hum of the control panels. The alien warrior stood beside him, its glowing eyes scanning the map one last time before turning toward Jace. "The bunker is our only hope," the warrior said, its voice calm but filled with urgency. "If the answers are there, we must reach it before they do." Jace exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. "All right, then we move now." The two of them climbed out of the abandoned subway station, emerging into the city's dark, ruined streets. The moon hung low, casting eerie shadows against the crumbling buildings. They stayed low, moving quickly through the alleyways, avoiding the main roads where soldiers patrolled. Jace's heart pounded with every step, but the alien warrior moved with quiet confidence. They reached the first hidden cache, tucked away in an old warehouse. The alien pressed a sequence of buttons on a rusted wall panel, and a small compartment slid open. Inside, Jace saw a few energy cells, some kind of compact explosives, and another alien weapon, sleek and deadly. Jace grabbed the supplies, nodding. "This will help." They continued moving, reaching the outskirts of the city just before dawn. The bunker was not far now. It was hidden beneath an old, collapsed structure, buried deep underground. Jace could see why the alien had chosen it. It was the perfect hiding spot. But something felt wrong. The warrior suddenly stopped, its eyes narrowing. "They are here." Jace froze. He listened carefully. At first, he heard nothing but the distant hum of the wind. But then, boots. Heavy, armored boots moving across the cracked pavement. "They found us," Jace muttered. Before he could react, a bright searchlight cut through the darkness, sweeping across the ruined street. Voices shouted in an unfamiliar language, and suddenly, red energy blasts rained down around them. "Move," the warrior barked. Jace ducked behind a broken car as blasts hit the metal, sending sparks flying. He gritted his teeth and returned fire. the alien weapon pulsing in his hands. The shot hit one of the soldiers, knocking them back with a forceful impact. The warrior moved swiftly, its blade flashing in the dim light as it took down another attacker with precision. But the enemy kept coming, their numbers growing by the second. "We're outnumbered," Jace shouted. The warrior grabbed his arm and pulled him toward the bunker entrance. Inside. Now. Jace ran, dodging incoming fire as the alien pressed another hidden panel. The ground rumbled, and a metal door slid open. The two of them dove inside just as another blast struck the ground where they had been standing. The door slammed shut, sealing them in. Panting, Jace pushed himself up and looked around. They were in a large underground chamber, filled with old technology. Strange symbols covered the walls, glowing faintly. The warrior moved toward a console, pressing a series of buttons. A holographic display flickered to life, showing a star map. Jace stepped closer, his breath catching in his throat. There, marked in the far reaches of space, was a massive ship. "The warship," he whispered. The warrior stared at the map, its glowing eyes filled with something Jace hadn't seen before. Hope. "This is it," the warrior said. "We have what we need." But their moment of relief was short-lived. A loud explosion shook the bunker. The enemy was trying to break in. Jace clenched his fists. "They're not giving up." The warrior turned to him. "Then we make our stand." Jace nodded, gripping his weapon tightly. He had started this as an ordinary scavenger, but now he was fighting for something bigger than himself. As the enemy broke through, Jace and the warrior stood side by side, ready for the battle ahead. Whatever happened next, they would face it together.